Oh. Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. I've been talking about escalation happening amongst different countries. The video yesterday, kind of clickbaity, in saying the US and Cuba could be going to war. You know, put a question mark, are we going to war with them? But today, the title is exactly what it says, and that is Pakistan and Afghanistan are in open conflict. The simple down and dirty is Pakistan launched some airstrikes against Afghanistan, attacking, Taliban, military stuff. The Taliban has started attacking Pakistani, outposts and bases in their country. So you can make the argument that Afghanistan has, started a ground invasion in Pakistan. And this all stems from Pakistan claims the Taliban is funding, terrorist organizations in Pakistan to try to destabilize the country. And a whole host of countries and the UN, they all basically said the same thing. Please stop fighting, solve your issues through diplomacy. China, Russia, and India have come out and explicitly said, we will mediate this problem if you let us. According to China, they have already started mediating. Apparently, they started this before this, retaliation strike that Afghanistan did. But, it's looking like, another regional conflict is kicking off. I don't want to get super crazy political, but, just to keep you up to speed, the Americans had grown sour over GATWA, or the Global War on Terror. We've dumped billions upon billions of dollars into this across multiple decades. Thousands of service members have been killed or injured. And, we accomplished our initial goals, and then, we tried doing nation building and didn't really work out too great. Donald Trump, in his first term, negotiated a withdrawal plan of the U.S. military and our assets from Afghanistan. A bunch of people praised him for it. And then Biden expedited that plan. You can make the argument that it was done intentionally, that, he was trying to, get a foreign policy win of his own. Some have argued that we were pulling stuff out too slowly, and so the original timeline wasn't going to be met. But regardless of whether you sit on this right or left, the Afghan withdrawal ended up turning into, a, kind of a disaster. Several Americans were killed, and we left billions of dollars worth of equipment. The military claims that they, destroyed all of the sensitive assets. And, we're not completely upset if an MRAP is left functioning, because there's not really big secrets there. It's a big truck. Some of the planes, we destroyed some of the hardware that, made it super capable and deadly and that kind of stuff. But, billions of dollars worth of stuff left. Small arms, heavy weapons, tons of munitions. Just, you can make the argument, we're out, they can deal with their problems on their own. Some people would make the argument that the Taliban seized the equipment very, very quickly and was able to much more effectively consolidate power. And now they're able to use this stuff with this conflict with Pakistan. Pakistan has historically had an issue with Afghanistan and India. There's been border disputes going on longer than I've been alive. But this one is, definitely cranking it up several notches. And could very well, roll into something, a lot bigger than, I like to think of it, as two neighbors and you're tossing dog poop over the fence. You're irritating each other, you're causing a disruption. Things aren't, that terrible. Until you start tossing eggs at each other's houses, you break down the fence and, start, dumping your trash or catching their lawn on fire or, that's kind of the way that I see this stuff happening. The other problem that I see is the U.S. has typically been a fairly good mediator and stuff like this. And that's probably why you see as many, countries getting involved. The UK released a statement, France, Germany, the UN, Russia, China, India. I think the US has released a statement, but the article that I read at the time said that we hadn't said anything about this whole thing going down. There's probably dozens of other countries that have probably said the same thing. We're looking into it. We should look at diplomacy over fighting. This hasn't been really going on, this current set of events hasn't been going on long enough to really, diplomacy talks can take most of an entire day and go on for weeks. I mean, you can look at Russia and Ukraine. We're probably over 500 hours of diplomacy talks over the course of the last 4 years. And not really seeing, much productivity out of that. How this pertains to us everyday American preppers is the period that we're in right now eerily reminds me of World War I. So many countries are putting more into their military, and I think, their nationalism and, just male population is itching to prove themselves. One of the big things, actually, I'll be a history teacher for a second. World War I started, we used the acronym MAIN, and that is militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So our military's spending more money to have better equipment, more soldiers, things like that? And that answer is undoubtedly yes. You know, countries that spend money on their militaries want to justify that, and they also want to, say whose military is better or worse than other people's. It's kind of that idea of, I got a new Mustang, new Camaro, new whatever, and now I have to go race it and prove that I have the faster vehicle and that I'm better at driving. Militaries are like that as well. I have more boats than you. I have a larger navy. I'm going to try to imply some naval dominance. The alliance thing. I think the US is trying to shift back into some form of isolationism, and that is reworking, how countries react with each other. I would treat it the same way. Like, if I'm going to go fight someone, and I know they've got a group of boys, I'm going to bring my group of boys with me. And I'm going to make sure that I bring, as many people as I can. And I really want my group of boys to know how to fight, be strong, all that sort of stuff. When large groups of people get together, it's easier for them to assert their thing. Then you can look at imperialism. China wants Taiwan, the US wants stuff in Greenland. Pakistan and Afghanistan probably wouldn't mind taking a little bit of each other's land. Pakistan definitely wants some of India. Parts of Africa are in civil war. People get restless. They want more stuff. I guess it kind of ties into it. But I buy dividend stocks, because I want to retire at some point. And I see how much money is coming in on average each month. I want the number to go up. So I need to put more into it and, have a stronger position. Countries think about stuff like that in the same way. And then the idea of nationalism. That is the simple saying of my country is better than yours, and I can prove it based off of all of those other things. I've got a better military, I have more friends, I have more stuff. I've got more rare earth minerals, I've got more manufacturing capacity, I have a higher population that can, get more stuff done. And, that's how we end up with some form of conflict. Got an itch here that doesn't want to go away. And so, I'm in my late 20s. Been teaching history for 5 years now. These things seem very similar. I seriously wonder if, 50 years from now, the things happening right now, people are going to explain, this stuff was happening in this part of the world, this stuff was happening over here, and at some point a major power got involved, or several minor powers grouped their resources, and this is the early signs of World War III. Most people learn World War II starts when Germany invades Poland in 1939. A deeper dive says, actually we think it starts in 37 when Japan invades China. That was its own individual event. When all of the global powers get together, Germany invades Poland, Britain and France get involved, and at some point Germany and Japan sign a treaty. That's kind of when they say enough people in the world have gotten involved for us to call this a world war. But a lot of people look at this conflict in Japan and they tie it into it, because this conflict starts before the war in Europe and it goes on after the war in Europe. Then you can continue to make the argument, Italy invades Ethiopia in 37. That's before they team up with Germany, before they start doing their, conquering in Europe. There's internal conflict happening in Russia, and then Russia has their little winter war with Finland. The generalized history textbooks, might dedicate a paragraph to these things that happened before, enough major powers got involved. So we very well could be in that period. We've got regional conflict going on, that at some point a bigger power is going to get involved, which will get other bigger powers involved. And at some point, we're going to figure out the size, and, conflict will start. We always say we want it to start a bit later so we can be more prepared. You can also see how Trump is trying to ramp up military stuff. I think he wants the military budget to increase by $150 billion. Before we got involved in World War II, we implemented a draft. We started training paratroopers and more units, and increased our military size by like 1 million people in the late 30s, well before we were involved in Europe. There's a pretty good recruitment drive for the military right now. They want to spend a bunch more money on the military. Maybe that says the people in charge up top know more than they're letting on. Maybe we're trying to better our economic situation, bring more jobs back, because we feel like the conflict is going to disrupt that much of, the consumption side in the U.S. And most of us are not going to know how to cope without having all of our things. It's been a long time since there's been a conflict. I don't think any of us are ready for rationing. I don't think, these military age males that are fit for service want to fight a conflict nearly as bad as we did in the past. People don't want to put in the extra effort of starting a victory garden, giving up certain things, going without a lot of our comforts. And, that's going to make this conflict that much harder on the home front. So it might seem kind of like an isolated event. We will see, in the coming days, weeks, it could go on for much longer. What's going to come of this? Is it just like, times in the past where they do stuff for about a week and then they settle down? Is this going to involve evolve into something else entirely. We don't know. And that's just another reason why, we spend money on preps. We go camping, we learn skills, we do all of this different stuff. And I promise you, sometime this weekend, I'm gonna sit down and record some skill that I know. I honestly think I'm gonna start with knot tying and explaining why these knots are important and showing you how to tie them. And I think we'll start with the bowline. I think that's an important knot to know. And it's good for me. I use these in scouts. Some of these knots I haven't used in a while. Some of them I might not remember how to tie. I've got books, I've got YouTube. I'm going to retrain myself and show you how to tie it and what we use it for. If there's a specific skill that you want me to record, you're still here this late in the video, leave it in the comment section down below. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more new stuff like this. Dislike it based off your opinion. But I think the most important thing is share this with all of your friends and family. I think this information needs to reach more people. And the easiest way to help me do that is those of you watching this, share it with someone that you know. They'll watch it, they'll share it with people that they know, and who knows, maybe we'll hit that 1,000 subscriber mark before the end of 2026. But I think I've rambled on long enough. I will catch you on the next one.